meeting with a flag salute. I'd like to welcome our guests. I don't see that there's a need for translation, so I will move on. I will accept a motion to approve the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda.
I would like to, maybe I'm not. Can we remove the cash flow? I have some questions on that from the agenda. Is that how I'm supposed to do it?
I believe it has to be, it would need to be approved, and so
the agenda,
you
I'm
could
sorry.
remove it from
the
required
approvals.
reports and put it
Okay.
And
somewhere
I think
else.
that is the proper way to do it, really, is ahead of time. So we will,
So you'd need,
well-
you'd need to do an amended motion, because I made a
no,
motion
you don't have
already,
to. We have no second. So
right? Gotcha.
look for a second to the motion. The motion dies for lack of second. I'll again accept a motion for approval of agenda.
Is that where I'm supposed to talk?
Yes, this
And
is
say
where.
no? Okay.
So this is where you'd make a motion to remove what you'd like to from the required approvals and add it to an agenda item.
I would like to remove from a required approvals the cash flow discussion, cash flow report, so we can have some questions and put that. Do I need to say where we're putting that? Or just remove it?
You need to say where you were putting it.
I would say that I would suggest that we create item C2 and move up superintendent.
C1A, you mean? Or C2?
C2 and then move item C2, superintendent comments, to item C3.
Okay.
That's what I would suggest.
I agree with that suggestion.
So there has been a motion to approve the agenda with the change involving removal of item C1-3 from required approvals, and then adding that to the agenda as item C2, moving item C2 superintendent comments down to C3.
Second.
There's been a motion by Director Stevenson, second by Director Garza. Any discussion?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Do we have any public comment today? So under item B1, public comment, there is no request for public comments. We'll move on to item B2, student representative reports.
Well, so today we just had our Christmas assembly, and it went really well. We got to recognize the Special Olympics team that actually won state last year, and they got chosen to represent, I might be wrong on this, they're representing something, but I think it's Washington in Seattle, and they're playing, and it's a giant event with teams from each U.S. state, and they got chosen to represent Washington for that, so that's really awesome.
Is that
And then,
basketball?
I think it's, is it basketball? I think it's soccer. I think it's soccer.
Okay.
We have been conducting the Spud Cup. I don't know if you guys have heard about that. It is an ongoing competition with Connell. So we basically last week we had a canned food drive and a warm clothing drive, kind of. And whoever raised the most out of the schools, they got a point. And then dress-up days, you got a point. And then at the actual game, which is tomorrow night, we are going to be counting attendance. And then we are also going to be playing some games during the game, like during halftime and everything, just to get more of the student body involved and join the two communities and benefit the communities. During the game, there's also going to be a coin drive. So we expect for a lot of people to come. So if any of you guys were expecting to go, please get there early. I have sent just like an update on the roundtable idea. I've sent my schedule over to Dr. Hurst. I'm waiting for a reply on him, and I really hope it goes through when the student reps meet with students from each school once a month. And then after break, we are going to begin thinking about Project Bridges and start planning it. And one thing I have a goal for this year, and that's to get the advertisement out early, make sure people understand what it is to get a bigger attendance at the event. That is it. Any questions?
All I have is our canned food drive, and my class by ourselves, we got almost 200 cans, so that was really nice. And then I can't remember the grand total, but I can get that total for you guys. And then our reader board is up and working, so that's really nice. We're all ready for the holidays and Christmas break, and then come back and take finals.
Great. Thank you for your reports. Just since you mentioned the canned foods you guys raised, does that go to the Christmas baskets program?
That's actually going to the food bank.
That goes to the food bank,
Yeah.
okay. All right, thank you for your updates. All right, we'll move on to board member reports. One thing that I'm trying to do is make sure that any item that's an item within an agenda item that maybe is a request of the board or something that we want to discuss, that I'm tying it to policy, because that is one of the ways that we evaluate ourselves too at the end of the meetings, is that we're tying things to policy. I don't think that personally the board member reports have to all be exhaustive here. Sometimes a board member might have something they want to talk about, and I would say that's permitted. I would ask that if you do have that, because I'll ask for it at the end of this section, if you do have something that you can tie it to policy on what you want to discuss, but also I would want to make sure it's not something that has any real impact on the public. It's more about things that would just impact us as a board. That make sense?
So what you're saying is if it does impact the public, it shouldn't be under board member reports, it should be somewhere else?
No, sorry for not clarifying. That would just be if we were adding something. If it impacts the public, I'd want it to be in advance in our agenda. I wouldn't want it to be a last-minute item.
Okay.
But sometimes board members think of something, but it only affects us, and I'm fine with us bringing that up without it being an agenda for the public beforehand. Thanks for clarifying that. Okay, so the first item is the legislative report.
I do not have anything at this time.
All right. You're following your previous legislative rep very well.
Right,
Good job.
got to.
The second item, this was an item I added into this. This is a discussion regarding the agenda verbiage. So, not something that you have to look at today. Maybe something we can just start thinking about for our next meeting. If you look at GP8, it lays out what our agenda is. The verbiage we use in our agenda here is different than the verbiage that's used in the policy. And so my question to the board is, do we feel it's important to make sure we use the same verbiage in both places or not? And if so, are we comfortable with the verbiage that's in GP8 to also be here, or do we think we should make some changes there? And so I just brought this up for the board to start to think about, and we'll have it on the agenda next meeting, because what that might entail is us making some verbiage changes to GP8 that might just make a little more sense to the public as they're looking at an agenda. But it came up because I think when you look at our items in the D section, when it says EL Survey Monkey results, the average community member might look at that and say, I don't know what that means. Whereas if we have an explanation of what that really is, that might be a better idea. And that was what prompted me to bring up the discussion. So think about that before the next board meeting. We'll have some more discussion. The next item, the NSBA discussion. So that is just simply a discussion about the conference. We've all said that we're going. I believe the hotels have been booked from Friday to Monday. And the conference starts Saturday morning, but it goes through Monday evening. And so what I wanted to ask the board is if you plan on leaving Monday right after the conference, or do you plan on leaving like Tuesday morning? Because if so, we'd need to extend that to the next day.
Right now, my plans are to leave on Tuesday.
Okay?
Same as mine.
All right. And I was thinking the same.
What time does it end on Monday? I mean, like
4 o'clock, I
evening?
believe.
Okay.
But we could always also, book it, and then as long as we give like 48 hours advance notice, we can make a change to those reservations.
If
But
you can
to try to
find a flight
an
that
extra day.
leaves and you want to leave late that night, you don't, it's not based on the majority of the board. Each
Right.
board
It's not
member can do
required.
their own thing.
Yeah.
And I may look and find a flight that I prefer Monday night and change my mind as well, but I don't imagine there's a lot of space available, so we might want to get that booked now and then change it later.
I would probably want to leave Monday night if we can find flights.
So would you like us to add a day or wait till you look for flights? Or
Am
whoever
I
books
booking
flights?
my own flights?
Well, no, you don't have to. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm booking my own, but you don't have to. So,
Right. No.
so we want to make it contingent on whether or not
Yes.
there's a flight to come back. Go see. So I'll let you work yours out with
Okay.
Talia. Is that
Yes.
And I don't know if Talia's already looked at flights for those that were wanting you to do it. Probably haven't, right?
Okay. We'll touch base because my children may need me back after that period of time away.
Student reps aren't going to this one, right? The one that you guys are talking about?
That's a good
we haven't had that
question.
discussion?
Oh. This is in, where's this at?
San Antonio.
San Antonio in April.
Yeah, in April, so you need to be prepared for that.
If it is something that you guys are really interested, I would say,
When-
I guess
when
I
do
would
we
invite you to
interview the
look
new
at
ones?
look at the schedule and see if there is anything for student reps. I haven't looked at it for a student rep.
And when do we interview new student reps? Because Kaden would be leaving, right?
yeah, we usually do that in May.
Okay.
We start that process, but the high school will they'll have some. Actually, it's in policy what the procedure is. It's not in board policy. It's a district operating policy.
Okay.
Anything else about that? Thanks for bringing that up. That wasn't a discussion that we had had. April, yeah, and
It's
the, you-
last few days. of
Tony, can you
spring
send
break.
them a link for
I
that?
just told them the website.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, really what comes from this, Tilly, is that if you could just see, we have current reservations, if you could just add, for 4 of us, Monday night as well. That's all. Thank you. The next,
Really
oh,
quick.
sorry, kid.
This is just a suggestion, but is there any way we could push up the interviews for the new student rep earlier so maybe they could get the chance to attend this meeting? Because I know coming into this, I had no clue what it was, and maybe getting the experience with Isabel, that will help them like kind of like guide into like this is what I'm in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so why don't you look, this would be a discussion you could have with Dr. Hurst, because it's a district operating policy, but this is something that the board would have some input on.
Yeah.
Look at the current procedure, and I don't even know if it says a date that they'll be interviewed and when that process will start. If we maybe are specific in there, then the high school principal knows I have to start this process at this time.
Okay.
That's a good
I think
suggestion.
that the new student rep should at least have one board meeting in like this year, so they can kind of gauge what the experience is going to be like, because mine wasn't until like September, I think my first board meeting was.
When was your guys' interview?
I was trying to remember, and I can't remember, but it was really close to like when school was out.
Mine was
I
like
think it
probably
the end of May.
maybe like 2 weeks, a
Yeah.
week away from graduation.
Yeah.
So you would prefer to have a board meeting still during the school year that
Yeah.
you'd be able to attend?
Maybe they could just sit in the audience, or like just so they can kind of see what a board meeting is like, and even if they, or maybe even have the candidates come before, like they even interview, just to see like if it's really something that they're wanting to do, so they understand what we have.
So
what we-
normally, we don't make suggestions on operating policies, but this really is a board-centered operating policy, so I
Mhm.
think it would be appropriate and a good opportunity for you guys to maybe make your first recommendations for a policy change. It would be something I think you'd bring up at a board meeting, but ultimately, Dr. Hurst would present it to us in
Yeah.
required approvals. But, yeah, good thoughts, thank you. Anything else?
No, that is it.
Okay.
We could also, I think, as a board, I forgot that it was the district operating policy because that was before policy governance. I'm gonna actually consider as a board changing that to a GP, because it's really a board function,
I agree.
not a district operating, even though that's what it is right now. So I'm gonna take a look at that too, just so the board knows.
Okay. The last item is the International Policy Governance Association Conference. It is June 21st through 23rd, 2018. We talked about this last time. The link is there, and hopefully the board clicked on that link to look at it to see what their interest might be. Take a look at it. I can say that it was interesting to see that from a policy governance perspective that wasn't specifically just for school districts. I think it brought a deeper understanding of policy governance. No, I don't think, I know. It brought a deeper understanding of policy governance for me. And then you gotta actually hear people talk about it, how they do it in their businesses. And so, I highly suggest it to anyone who hasn't gone. Mike, you went last time? Okay, so I think the 2 new board members are the only ones who haven't gone, but look and see when the deadline to register, they're gonna have early registration that's less expensive and all that, and if it's something you'd like to do, then I'm not gonna keep including it in here, probably in a couple more meetings, or if you want us to conclude it next meeting, if you guys think you would have an idea by then, we can include it next meeting and then kind of button it up. Did you say next meeting then? Bring it up again?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll take it serious. I would really love to learn a lot more about the policy governance. I can see this would be a good opportunity to do
I want to bring it up because I forgot to put it in here. I meant to ask Talia to do, I didn't, but it does just affect the board, so I'm going to bring it up. One of the things we're committed to through policy is continuing to train our new board members. And so what I'd like to do is look at some training. We can do it in January. If we feel like things are kind of full for January, we can always push it off. But we need to have another training for both of you to just to continue with the policy governance training. Now, my suggestion would be maybe what we're missing right now is interpretation of our policies a little bit. So I know you had some questions last time, Jen, about what did you mean by this, and maybe a workshop where we can actually talk about what. There's two board members still on the board that were there at the inception of policy governance that probably might be able to look back at what was our intent when we chose this policy. And so if we'd like to do that, we should probably do it sooner than later.
I think that sounds great, yeah.
Does anyone have any ideas of when they'd like to do it?
Next Monday?
Exactly.
I'm free at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon that day.
It is Christmas.
You got the joke?
Right.
Right now, I'm going to go to upcoming events. We have things going on the 8th and the 16th of January. And then, of course, a board meeting on the 22nd. So 8th, 16th, and 22nd are
We
currently.
already have a workshop before the meeting.
Right.
We'll have a short 1-hour workshop. For,
Could it be about a 1-hour segment before the 22nd meeting?
We were going to, just in case we had a lot of interest at the 8th, we were going to add another one at the 22nd as a backup. And I'm concerned about the one on the 12th is the day before, of February, I'm sorry, is the day before ballots are due. So if there's comments, that could potentially be not the best choice of times, is I guess where I'm going there.
One of the things the board has said in the past is that we just kind of, Mondays are potential
Right.
board days. And so sometimes we'll schedule workshops on Mondays as well. And so we could always just schedule a separate Monday for this workshop if we want to.
Right.
A lot of times we'll do like a dinner workshop. How does the 15th or 29th look?
The 15th works for me. It's a holiday, but
It is.
it works for me.
That would work for me as well.
It would work for me.
Is there an issue though with, well, we don't
won't
necessarily
any
need support staff.
for that.
This really is a board meeting, so,
It's just a board workshop, and it'll be run by the board members.
yeah, good point. There's, if we want it to be
But
on
we're still
Facebook Live,
televising
though,
it, and though
it would take some staff.
Right. It would still take. So does that get into sticky?
Well, we don't have to.
There's no requirement to televise. We do that
There's no
because we want to.
requirement.
Okay.
It's an added service that we provide to the public. But if we, my view is if the board sets it for that day and there's nobody available to do the technology, that wouldn't be a reason not to have the meeting. The public can still come. They're still invited to come here and watch.
Yeah.
From my perspective.
Basically, it's just a training session. No decisions are being made or anything
Right.
like
Yeah,
that.
Yeah,
all
no action.
workshops are no
I-
action. So
Then, in that case, I think the 15th is fine for me.
How about you, Mike?
I'm good.
All right, so
time.
No, of January.
January, so that's
Does
Martin
that
Luther
work for
King
you too?
Junior Day. You're not required to come to anything but regular board meetings, but this is an opportunity to ask about policy and interpretation of policy. So it might be a good opportunity for you.
Then we jumped back, sorry. Yeah.
What time, Mr. President?
Do we want to go 6, or I'm available even a little bit earlier if anyone would like to do that?
I personally, it doesn't matter to me, but I'd personally rather do like a noon to 2 because I'm not working that day. It'd save my evening.
Oh, I'm working that day.
You are working that day?
It's Monday. I was thinking Tuesday for some
Oh, I
reason.
figured you were.
I can-
It's
won't be
Martin Luther
available till
King
6.
Day. You are open on Martin?
I'm not a government entity.
I am. It doesn't matter. We get, so 6 o'clock then?
6 of,
If
yeah.
you'll be working.
I could do a noon to 2 workshop. If we want to do a 2-hour noon workshop, I'm fine with that.
I'd prefer, for me, I'd prefer that, but it's just up to everybody. I don't know if Ken's working that day.
I am working that day, but I've got other people that I could do that, so it's no
Are
problem.
you working
It's
Martin
no
Luther
problem.
King Day, Mike? I could do either way. It'd be more convenient for me noon to 2, but I could do either way.
Okay.
Whichever.
Well, I'm looking for a consensus. Noon to 2.
Noon to 2 for me.
All right, sounds like noon to 2.
Okay.
Let me get this in my calendar quickly.
And you will, Mr. President, you'll handle any assignments you want to make.
Yes, I will. You'll have them all.
Good to know that.
I'm not looking to, on this one, I don't think we're looking to for the basics of policy governance. You guys feel comfortable with that? It's going to really be
Yes.
about our specific policies in this district, and so it'll be pretty informal, and I think we just start from the top. And everyone, all board members who want to participate can, as far as the explanation. Okay, great. So, does anyone have any other board member reports that they'd like to bring up that won't affect the public?
I don't have a report, but I just have a question for the board. If you go to board policies, approved policy GPA 8.2, and Talia, you can put that on the screen if you want. It'll be small, but scroll to the very bottom where it says board agenda availability. It's almost at the very bottom. But my question for the board is our policy states that we will make the agenda live at 24 hours before the meeting date, which is the state law. And right now we're making it live sometime on Friday to the public. My suggestion, or the thing I wanted to get comment from the board is I would prefer as a board meeting that it went live to the board the way this says, by the end of business day on Friday, and then it went live to the public 24 hours before the meeting, so that if there's something in there that I catch as a board member, it's not live to the public and then it gets changed a whole bunch of times. It's more, the board has a chance to look at it from Friday, the end of business day Friday, until 24 hours before the meeting. And then at that point, it would go live to the public and not have a bunch of changes from the public's point of view. For me, it's really more to make it more seamless for the public, so they can look at the agenda once, and it's a final agenda, not, from my view, not an agenda in progress, because the board members have found errors or things that they think that should be different, and that it changes and is fluid. I don't know what the rest of the board feels about that, but it's always good to have it available more than 24 hours. It's not like we're breaking the law or anything the way we're doing it now. I just think it would be better for the public and for the board if we figured out a way to make it open for the public 24 hours before and to the board on Friday afternoon, like the policy states.
What do you think, Ken?
My first question is, who's responsible for setting up the agenda?
The board president and
is
the
it the
board
board president?
secretary. It's in
And he
that,
goes over with
it's
it?
written by policy as well.
Okay.
I think most of the time what it happens is individual items within the agenda, questions
Mhm.
come up about that, and they get changed. Or someone says, oh, okay, I see that, yeah, I'm not ready for it, then they remove it. And sometimes the public then, if they were looking in advance, they'd say, I thought
Seeing
this
it
was going to
change
be
around, yeah.
in there.
And there's been
So-
times before I was elected that I would go, that wasn't there. Where did this come from? And things like that. So yes, I think that
So,
would be
yeah.
better.
Yeah,
It's-
I agree with that.
It's
too.
written in our policy that way now. It's not like I'm asking for a change. I'm just asking if the board is okay with doing what we agreed to in the policy.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will just make sure that this is a discussion I have with Dr. Hurst at our next agenda meeting, and I'll be specific about following GP 8.2 with that. Okay,
I have one more item, Mr. President.
go ahead.
Just clerical. I thought we'd covered this as a board already, but I see that our library is still not up to date. Again, it's more two reasons. One, transparency to the public, and one, for me as a board member to be able to go back and look at our monitoring reports and our superintendent evaluations. There's no evaluations in here of Chris or the one that, the last one I think is 14-15 still in here of the evaluations, and then everything's pretty well a year behind on our library from what I can tell.
I had
So
some
to me,
discussion.
it reflects on the board if it's not up to
I
date.
agree. I had some discussion with Talia about that yesterday, I believe. And it's something I plan to bring up again to Dr. Hurst, and I will just be very specific about what it is that the expectations are. Because I think that there's been some discussions about this in the past with the board, and so I think I have a pretty clear understanding what the expectations are. So once we get it updated, then the board can let me know if, there's still more that needs to be done. But I agree, and we'll work on it together. Great. Okay, thank you. Anything else?
I just got another quick thank you again. I know that I did this last time, but the schools were tremendous help to the community Christmas baskets. Of course, we had our delivery on Saturday, and we got all the final can counts in and everything. Between all the schools, they supplied over 8,000 items of canned food, everything. That's almost 75% of what we had in there.
Wow.
So I'd really like to put out a good thank you to the schools, the staff, administration, and all their help they did on these can drives at the school and everything. It was just great, and it really helps it make it easier for us. And with that, we were able to supply over 300 families with meals for the holidays. And I see a few faces out here that helped to deliver the baskets, which was really great. I really appreciate it, and all the work that everybody has did on that.
Well, thank you, Ken. That's a great program, and I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but this was my first year of delivering. I took my two older kids, and I think it was a great experience for them, and it was a great experience for me, really. And this won't be my last year. It was something I enjoyed doing. I will continue to do. So it's a well-oiled machine the way that thing runs too.
It's come together pretty good. And we do have we had somebody do a video production on it, and it is on Facebook right now through the Community Christmas Baskets program that you could set and view. And we've got the total numbers over the last 41 years, what we've actually supplied.
That's awesome.
Right. And that video was great. Yes.
Okay. Anything else? All right. So we're going to move on to item C1. Do I need to update my agenda? I still only have 1 and 2. Okay. If any of you, the board members, still only have
How do
2
you
items.
update it?
Quick refresh.
I'm just refreshing.
Oh, that. Oh, okay. The normal update button. Got it.
There it is. Okay, so item C1, the modified required approvals. I will accept a motion to approve required approvals.
I make a motion to approve those.
Been a motion by Director Stevenson to approve. I hear a second.
Second.
Second by Director Garza. Any discussion?
I just have a question for clarification on the board meeting minutes. At the very top, where it shows members present, I'm just not sure of the protocol of, at the beginning of the meeting, because we had a change, it shows Director Simmons as a president, but he wasn't the president until halfway through the meeting. So I'm just not sure. I just want to make sure we have that right. I don't know if it really should just say directors or how that should work. I was just curious what the board thought. It's hard to see it because that Talia was ahead of me. I can't move it now.
You have to keep closing it, and it'll come back.
It comes back again. I was afraid to close it.
There we go.
You see at the top, it's just for the public because it shows at the top Rob Simmons, president, and then it says called to order by Vice President Tony Ashton, who wasn't the vice president at the top. It's kind of, from my view, kind of clunky. And
It's an awkward meeting, though, because it starts one way and ends another, so I don't know.
Yeah, my only thought was is that you could easily just put members president, and take the titles. Just put everybody as directors at the top, and then you don't have that.
Because the rest of the
It
minutes.
explains
the
it in
minutes
Yeah.
will say
the
that
So
minutes
you're saying
explain
a
those
general
things.
change to all future minutes is just to put director?
You could do that, but for this one itself,
Right,
just
for
where it
this
says
one.
members present, it only happens once a year, right, where that potentially changes. But,
And that's, my concern would be that we have to remember to change it
yeah.
once a year. I would say that just put director after everybody, and then, yes, it is explained, I think, in the
I'd be okay with that
minutes.
as well. It's,
Who's got what title, yeah.
Hmm.
I'm fine with that. That way you don't have to worry about always changing it for every other meeting, Leah.
and that's all technically correct, because you are still a director, even though you're president.
Okay. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Move on to item C2. This was the December cash flow report. That request was to pull that from required approvals. And so, Director Stevenson, you had a question?
I have a question.
policy question?
Before you have a question. Is this informational, or does this require approval to begin with? Or why was this put in there? Is this the cash flow report itself, does it have to be approved by the board? Or is it informational?
I want to say cash flow reports. Well, I don't know if it's just reports. There's certain things that have to be required through law, but I don't know if this report is one of them.
I think that I asked for it at the last meeting because I wanted to see.
It's not in every
Percentages.
agenda, that's why I was asking.
Right.
And
Good question. So, I think that's what we have to find out before the next
Brian,
meeting, is if
maybe
what the legal requirement of what we. I know there's certain things we do have to approve. So if it's not something we legally have to approve, then required approvals would not be the right spot for it. It would be more of a superintendent report, correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
Just a comment about that, it seems like the common practice is that the last board meeting of every month, this item is included in the required approvals. So it's consistent practice. It would have appeared
Okay.
even absent the request.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe it's been in there. I'm just
Yeah.
not sure if it's something that is technically a required approval or
Information.
informational to the board. It was in there it's another one of those things that was been in there since I was a
Forever.
board member in the beginning. And so it may be something that never changed with policy governance that maybe
It should have.
should be looked at as a superintendent report. Because if it's not required to be approved, it really shouldn't be there. It should be in.
Yeah, so the question is just really
comments.
about what the proper place for it in our agenda for future. But for this current one, Jen, you have.
So my questions are on page 3, under, maybe it's not page 3, now that I'm on page 3. I think it's page 4. Under general fund, the percent of the revenues, how is local taxes in the 35 to 40% and the state taxes in the 20 to 25% for the annual? Those two differences, in some cases almost double, was an interesting percentage difference. That was confusing to me.
I would say that the proper person answer is Brian, correct?
Yep.
All right.
Are you talking about the percent that, just so I'm following what you're saying?
Under revenues?
In the general fund, under revenues, there's local tax percentage and there's state and federal tax percentages.
You're
Yeah.
asking why have we collected a higher percentage of a certain tax
By
and not
10
the
to
other?
15% from local and not
Yeah, and I'm probably
from-
looking at the wrong page because mine.
It's page 4. So general fund, cash basis, I think it's page 4.
It's the first page of the
Because all these say page 1 when I'm.
report that typically makes me go
Yeah,
cross-eyed.
they do. That is confusing. Do you want me to find it on yours?
It's the overall fourth page.
37.38.
Yes, yes.
Okay, I think Brian has an answer. He's just waiting to share.
I was actually trying to find it as well with Tony. I was a little bit lost. in
Sorry.
there, so it is on page 4 of 10, correct?
4 of 12, yeah.
4 of 12. Excuse me. And Jen, just so I make sure I have it correct, under, what letter is it under?
It's up there on the screen. Talia has it on the screen, and she's got her little cursor next to the 37 and the 35%.
Oh, okay.
It's under A,
revenues,
local
taxes.
taxes. It's like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, if I'm looking.
Which
at
two are
the
you
same
asking to
place.
compare, Jen, just so I'm clear too?
Because they're
The
all
local
different.
taxes, as opposed to the state and federal, they're within just a couple. The state and federal are within a couple of percentages apart, but the local taxes are 10 to 15% above what we've collected over the state and federal. So I just thought that was an interesting.
And to clarify,
Variation.
local is taxes. The state and federal is not taxes, but it is state and federal revenue, right?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, that is correct, state and federal contributions. So the majority of, at least under the current system, the way that school funding currently works in Washington, the majority of operational expenses for the school district are provided on the local level. And so it would be anticipated that their percentage would be the highest. The whole decision that we're moving into in 2019 with the McCleary decision is asking the state to take on a larger role in that. But when we have our local operating levies under the current system, they fund, in essence, the brunt of our local educational dollars. So we would anticipate that to be the largest percentage,
Okay,
greater
so
than state or federal.
Then you're saying the percentage is how much we're going to collect overall, not necessarily the percentage for the calendar year from each of those specific revenues.
So none of this is calendar year. We go by school year.
Okay.
So it
September to, right.
straddles
Yes.
two
Okay,
portions
saying
of
it
two calendar
incorrectly.
years.
Right.
So the percentages that we see here are applicable to that school year. Yes. So
Okay.
But it's
in this
actually
effect would be 2017.
the 30,
2018.
like revenue item number 1, where it says 37.38. That's the actual amount that's been collected so far in this period, right?
But is it
actual 4-year, yes.
for
It's
just that
it's
line
not
item?
a percentage of the total budget. It's a percentage. If we expected 2.9 million, we've got 1.8 million, or 1.1 million of it, and there's 1.8 million left to be paid to the district, right?
That is correct.
So we've collected 37% of the amount that we planned on getting. so
And
far.
local taxes are not collected per month. They're not collected on a monthly basis. They're collected in over time as the year goes. So the largest, generally they're collected in both April and October. And so you would not necessarily expect to see, roughly 10 or 12% collected every month because they're collected in chunks. Does that make sense?
Okay, so because of the chunking, those two predominant months, we've got a big chunk so far.
Yes.
And the local, or the state and the federal are more monthly?
Well, again, they're not.
They're
so
weird too?
they're not necessarily 100% taxes. So it's
right,
as the local, as Adams County or Grant County or Franklin County, the applicable portions collect the property tax from individuals and businesses within that jurisdiction. They then pass that applicable amount that is going toward the Othello School District to us.
Okay.
The two largest months that they do that, the largest checks that we get, are from collections that take place in April and October. That's not the only time collections take place. They do take place over the year. For example, if you don't pay your taxes on time, and then I'm sorry, I come and I pay, they will collect it at that time. They don't hold on to that. They will pass it to us.
Okay,
But we don't expect to see an
okay.
even collection each month. Does
All
that
right,
adequately
yes.
answer the question?
Yes, that answers that question.
All right. That
Okay.
question. So
Yep,
the next.
there's more.
Yes, ma'am.
I didn't write down what pages these are, but there are, so in terms of lay terms, outstanding warrants and canceled warrants, those don't mean the same thing in accounting lingo. So I don't know what those mean.
Would you like me to refer to a specific example or just in general?
In general is fine because they're in there. So I don't know what page they're on.
So, well, anything outstanding. So outstanding is where the debt has been incurred. We have bought something, but we have not yet paid it. So the debt outstanding.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, the other one?
Canceled.
So
warrants.
there are some times when, we're humans, we make mistakes. We write a check and we have to cancel it.
Okay.
It may have been made for a wrong amount, or oops, we forgot to include something. So we will cancel the entire check. Our checks go through the county treasurer, so we have to physically cancel the check, hold on to the check, notify the county this is not to be paid, issue the new warrant. And so for that time, that doesn't happen immediately. It's not.
Okay, right.
and
Okay,
so for that time, it's a canceled.
for the purpose of this form, every time I see the word warrant, I need to think debt
Yes.
is a better term.
Yes.
Okay. That's it. Thanks.
You're most welcome.
Thanks, Jen. Okay, so if there's no more questions, I'll accept a motion to approve the item C2 December cash flow.
So we're going to operate under the assumption this needs to
We're
be
gonna
approved.
do it the
for
way we
today.
have been.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Director Garza to approve, second by Director Johnson. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Motion carries 5-0. I'll move on to item C3. As we spoke about in our last board meeting, these are items that may have been requests by the board or just sometimes informational for the superintendent. Might want us to know about something that's going on. If it's a request from the board or something to do with the board, I'm making sure that I tie it into a policy. And so we had a request for an update essentially on what we're doing at the Transportation Center to mitigate the issues we've had with groundwater. EL10 and EL11 are the two policies tied to that. The other one is a special board meeting. That is just, bring it up, whether or not we needed a special board meeting to award the land lease. That was also asked by a board member last time. So the answers are in there, and this will be an opportunity if anyone has any questions for clarification or if they're good with the report.
I have a comment.
Okay.
On the ORTC groundwater. Just as one board member, I'd like to, as that's a continuing issue, I'd like to have some kind of a timeline for updates so that the board's apprised of the changes. There's a lot of things in there that, in that report, I'm fine, they're just not known yet. So I'd just like to continue to receive updates as things change. And I don't know how, without having to remember to request it. So I don't know if we can, as a board,
How
ask
often,
the superintendent as things change.
how frequent, just as things change, as any new information is received?
Would
Okay.
be, that's just my one board member's
How does the rest of the
thoughts.
board feel about that?
I'd like to know when it happens, as it's happening. I mean, because we can't, the unknowns are unknowns, and once Greg gets wind of what's going to happen, or a specific determination that we're made aware of it.
I think I'm getting a consensus there. Everyone would like those
Yeah. Now,
updates?
Is this a continuing water still flowing?
I don't know that I know the
Yeah.
answer to that. I mean, it's a continuing issue that
There's
we've had and
more
we've
water
talked about.
flowing in the winter than in the summer, for
Well-
sure, because of evaporation.
When I was on city council, we actually had all that area engineered. We sunk many holes out there and studied that area, the whole South Broadway area, for about 2 years. And I believe the city carries all that data still in the engineering plan for out that direction. So it might be a little helpful if you
Yeah.
could get that from them. And it has the times of years and everything else in the water holes, that flows through all the holes that we had drilled out there. So I know there's been a lot of pre-engineering out there that they did to put streets and curbs and everything out in that area. It was
Good
one
to
of
know.
the things we had to do.
Thank you.
And that was completed 2 years ago? Or it
Actually,
was
that
done
study-
for 2 years?
That study was done for almost 2 years by engineers. I know it was almost a $500,000 engineering study that was done for the city, but it was completed probably 5 years ago.
Okay.
So, I think what I'm hearing is that they just like, whenever there's some significant, or any changes to the status and new information received, that the board also gets updated on that in same format, written format. Correct? Good. Any other questions or discussions on those items? All right. So we will move on to item D1, monitoring reports.
I have a question for the board on how do we not get into operational issues as board members, as individual board members, when we know that as a whole, these reports are as true as possible, but maybe some of the details, not true is not the correct word. Maybe we know some of the details are not being fully followed the way that the goal is. Does that make sense? What do we do when?
So we've, I guess, I'll take a shot at it, and the president could correct me when I'm incorrect, but we monitor 3 different ways. Direct observation, through the report, help me with the third one.
Internal report or external report?
Internal report or external report. It would not be micromanagement when the report comes for a board member to say, through direct inspection, I monitored, I saw this myself. Where I think it gets ambiguous is if a board member is saying, somebody else told me that this happened and I'm taking their word over yours. That
Okay.
I would have an issue with that as a board member, because now you're taking somebody else's word over the superintendent's. If you actually, as a board member, directly inspected it and saw it and want to make a comment to something that you personally saw, then I think that's one thing.
Okay, so
If
let's
that
say
makes
that
sense.
okay,
If,
I
even if,
understand
even
the
if
difference.
multiple people inside the system came to you and said, we believe this is happening, I think as a board member, you have an obligation to go
to go and
talk
do
to the
our own
superintendent first and do
Okay.
your own evaluation of it.
and tell him that we're going to be doing our own evaluation.
Sure.
internal.
I don't think he needs to be
I don't think you even have to tell him,
forewarned.
but
Okay.
I mean, just, on your report page, whatever, I see this, and this is what I.
Okay.
just from personal experience, I can tell you as a board member, it just happened recently, but I won't bring up the situation where was given information from a community member that had been told that this happened at a school. I went and found out the information myself, and it was completely wrong. So if I had just relied on that person's perception of what happened,
Right.
I would be making comments based on something that wasn't true as I researched it myself.
Okay, and then we bring that up when? We bring that up under when we go into SurveyMonkey, or we address it with when we see by direct inspection that some of these reports are not fully correct? How are we supposed to address that?
When you're talking about reports, are you talking about superintendent reports? Or are you talking about monitoring reports?
When we're getting these monitoring reports,
Okay.
and I know some of that detail is not being followed the way that the report says, what do I do then?
You
That's
would bring
what
it
I'm
up to the board and show the evidence of why you think it's not being followed and how you would.
Okay,
So
so
the
I should
proper
bring that
way-
up right now, is
The
what you're
prop-
saying?
Well, I have another comment. These monitoring reports aren't supposed to be in here. They're supposed to be for next board meeting.
Oh.
EL
Okay.
4 and 5 are monitored first meeting of January. But that's a separate issue. But
Right.
the proper way to do it is we as board members can monitor through internal report, which is monitoring reports. We can monitor through direct inspection or through external reports. We might, as a board, say, we want an outside party to come and monitor this policy because we want to see, we want to get a third party to tell us what's going on for compliance. Okay, we've never done that, but we have the ability to do that. So what we typically do is through the report that was given by the superintendent. And then in the SurveyMonkey is when we would put in our inspection. If we say, we don't believe we were compliant, and it's because I witnessed this, and
Okay.
it might not be out of compliance in the entire policy, but maybe an exception to part of the policy.
Okay.
You would say, and then if none of us witnessed it, then that discussion, in my opinion, would come up in the SurveyMonkey results. When we go over the SurveyMonkey, and there's going to be someone saying out of compliance or an exception, and then we'll ask who made that comment, and we'd have more discussion. And then the board decides if the board as a whole feels that same way based on the information that was given. Does
Okay,
that make
so
sense?
Yes, so do it in SurveyMonkey is what you're telling me.
Make any direct inspections. Now, doesn't mean that you have to wait until if you observe something that is against policy,
Okay?
out of compliance, it doesn't mean you have to wait till next
Right.
September till we monitor that.
Right.
You can bring that up, you can make a request of the president. I would like to discuss something I directly inspected and this policy, it's with this policy. We'd always have that opportunity to have that discussion. We don't have to wait.
Okay.
The rest of the
And
board
you
agree
can
with me on
always,
that.
you can always make a decision as a board member that maybe you want more information before you make a public comment on something that happened, and you could ask the president or the superintendent to directly, there's a policy that says as long as it's not burdensome, overly taxing on the system, you can ask any time for the superintendent to give you more information on something you think may or may not have happened.
Okay.
Or is not part of compliance.
All right.
I just caution you as a board member, be careful, make sure you know all the facts before you bring something up in public.
Yes, right. Okay.
So, is that everything, Jen?
That's all of my question
Okay.
for that, yeah.
So back to monitoring reports, I apologize. I didn't catch this, I don't think. I was understanding there was no monitoring reports. I might not even clicked on it to see if there's anything under it. There are no monitoring reports on our calendar for this meeting. They're already done, so feel free to read them, but it's next meeting when we'll actually approve the acceptance of those.
And just for clarification,
Approve the receipt.
for Jan and Ken, what, in the monitoring report section, all we're doing is acknowledging receipt of that report. We're not necessarily normally making comments on the report itself until we do the SurveyMonkey, the day we get it.
You can ask for clarification on the report itself. Like, there's a part of it you quite understand what's being said. That would be a proper time to do it. But if you're responding to the report, the SurveyMonkey is where you would respond to give your opinion on compliance.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to move on then to item D2. This is the SurveyMonkey results from EL2 and EL3 that we received monitoring reports on in our last board meeting. So we'll start with EL2. On question 1, everyone found that to be in compliance. That question was specifically, the superintendent shall not cause, allow, or fail to prevent any practice, activity, decision, condition, procedure, or organizational circumstance which is unlawful, unethical, unsafe, disrespectful, imprudent, unfair, inequitable, disruptive, indignified, or in violation of contract, board policy, or collective bargaining agreements. That covers it. And the board found that the superintendent was in compliance. And there was a comment, in the future, please indicate clearly whether you believe you're in compliance. Your evidence of compliance is great. Keep up the great work. Also, since there was only one question, there should have been an option to choose in compliance with an exception. So, a couple things there. One was a request for the superintendent to put in the report whether they felt they were in compliance or not. The other was a kudos, and the last one was more about the SurveyMonkey itself, that because there's only one question and it's not divided into bullet items, am I right on that? Does anyone want to clarify? Then it should have with exceptions as an option, because I suppose someone could look at this and say everything was in compliance except there was something that was disruptive, and that would be the exception, I guess, right? So,
Okay.
Tony, that sounds like something you wrote. Am I right?
It is something I wrote.
All right.
But the reason that I had it in there is because the BSR 4.1.2 has an option for in compliance with the following exceptions, and I don't think it follows our approved policy to not have that option in there.
Great point. Yes.
That's the case.
I think actually, from my memory, it's the board requested it to be that way, and I think the board incorrectly did that. I don't think it was the secretary's fault. I think it was. I recall a conversation of the board saying we didn't need it in there if there was just one question. But as I've studied it, I don't think that's correct. But I'm going off of memory. I don't know what you guys remember.
No, I think you're correct.
I do agree with the comment of it would be nice for him to be able to state I feel like I'm in compliant or not. I agree with that portion of that comment.
That was my comment as well, and I would personally prefer it, but I can't find, I thought it was in policy, but I can't find it in BSR 4 where we actually request the superintendent to put that in his report, and so it would need to be changed in the policy probably. It had been done that the other way in the past. I think it should be consistent myself, but it's not in policy, so we haven't given the superintendent specific instruction on that.
So I have a question. Why does the board, would the board like to see the superintendent's opinion of whether or not they're in compliance?
I think that's our determination to make.
It's our determination if we agree, from my view.
I don't think it's bad for him to give his opinion. I mean, he's basically giving his opinion and his proof of his opinion, but he doesn't specifically say it. He's giving us his opinion, but he's not coming out and saying it. I agree. I think it'd be nice to say, I feel like I'm in full compliance. I feel like I'm really close to compliance. I don't know.
Just playing the devil's advocate, I would say that
I can see what you're saying, though.
it's our job as a board to determine compliance, right? And the superintendent's feeling of whether or not in the compliance is irrelevant. That's devil's advocate. I'm just saying that. And that's typically we've had, the
Yeah.
superintendent has told us if they feel they're in compliance. Most of the time we agree. There's been times when we haven't. There's been times when the superintendent said they're not in compliance, and we've disagreed with that. So
My
I
issue
just was
has to do
curious.
with consistency. We do have an EL that I can find if I look very long that says that if the superintendent is out of compliance, he should be if the superintendent feels like he's out of compliance on a policy, he's supposed to let the board know immediately. We have an EL that says that.
Right. Not waiting for a monitoring report, though.
Correct. Yep. But it's just really my personal thing. But the way I've written, my feeling is that if me as a board member want to see it differently, I need to change the policy. Besides, the board could request it, but it's not in policy saying that he needs to do that. I understand what you're saying with, at the end of the day, we found the superintendent in compliance for things that he's felt he's not in compliance of in reports in the not too distant past where we've disagreed with the superintendent on that as well. But from my personal view, I would prefer the report showed the superintendent's belief, and then here's the reasons why, because it flows better in the report for the public. But him stating that he's in compliance or not doesn't necessarily change my personal opinion as a board member, because I'm going to look at the evidence. But it's just, to me, it just really has to do with the way the report's written and ease of the public when they look at it.
Okay. So, like you said, if you'd like that to be an absolute, then you would need to add it to the policy. But in this one, what would the board like to include as a comment, if anything, or is in compliance good enough?
I'm okay with the comment not being there. I mainly put it there because I wanted to have a discussion with the board.
Rest of the board,
Strike the comment.
just in compliance and leave it?
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll move on to EL3, Survey Monkey. Now this one, we have 4 questions. And question number 1, ensure that at least one other executive staff member is familiar with board and superintendent issues and processes and is capable of assuming superintendent responsibilities on an emergency basis. I dropped the ball on this as I'm reading this. I apologize to the public on this, and I was going to do this as well for the board. After we did the flag salute, I was going to explain why Assistant Superintendent Pete Perez is running the meeting today, partially because Dr. Hurst is not here, but this is also because we were going over this policy. He wanted to show that he was setting it up for potential for emergency succession to show this was part of a direct inspection for compliance. So I apologize for that, and I apologize, Pete, I meant to introduce you. So that being said, we have 4 that found compliance on this and 1 that said out of compliance. So I'll read the first comment. I can see you are working toward achieving this, but still have some gaps on and work on training staff. Then the second one is, in the future, it would be good for you to state whether you believe you are in compliance or not. Same thing as before, right?
We've already hashed it.
Okay. All right, so 1 person not in compliance, 4 are. I don't like to just move on and say, well, that's 4 against 1. I would like to hear some
So
specific thoughts about.
I'm the one that put the not in compliance
Okay.
because at the time we took the Survey Monkey. There wasn't, it was talked about in the document, but he says not fully trained yet. In the future, what would you do? Plans talked about potentially having the 3 run a meeting, but it had not taken place yet. So at the time of the survey, not in compliance. And I understand that he can come back and go, okay, we've got that done now in a few months, once
Yeah.
Mhm.
this meeting and a few more have taken place. But at that time, I felt like not, probably could, but not fully ready on an emergency basis because it had not taken place yet.
Yeah.
Now, is that specifically the fact that he had not had someone else run a meeting? Was that what you were talking about? Or was there
Partially
more?
that, but then there was also the discussion in the thing, in the document it said, in the future, we're going to be doing a what would you do plan, and I read it as, we're not quite there, is what I kept throughout the entire, his version of proof, I kept reading as, we're working on this, but we're not there. We're working on this, but we're not there. That's what I kept. That was my interpretation of his report.
Okay. Any board members have any specific comments or questions about that?
As just one board member, I wouldn't find it in compliance or not, based on whether an assistant superintendent has actually run the meeting, because that's not what our policy says. Our policy specifically says that he's familiar with the board and superintendent issues and is capable. Familiar and capable is what the policy says, not that he's actually run a meeting. So I understand that in Dr. Hurst's report, that's one of his goals is to have that happen, but that's not what our policy does not state that the assistant superintendent has to run a meeting once a year, twice a year, ever. It just says that he should be capable and up to speed, familiar with the issues.
So based on the input, we heard a couple of other things. Do any board members want to change what their feeling of compliance or out of compliance on this? Or are we still good with what we've answered? Because ultimately, in compliance is the one that's the majority here.
Right. And you are correct. Familiar and capable is definitely the
This is
key
good.
words.
That's why we have these discussions, so that we can really
Right.
drill down on what the policies mean. And you don't have to change your feeling on it either.
Right.
It's just that whatever goes in the report is going to be the majority. And so he'll be, as of right now, he's in compliance unless 2 other board members change their mind and
Right.
say out of compliance.
Right.
And so your comments,
I think I'm going to still
in there.
stay where I'm at because we know that he could always come back and say, okay, now what do you think? But yeah, there is a higher.
okay. So we'll move on to question 2.
So, Mr. President, are you going to ask the board if they still want to include that comment? You can still be in compliance with the comment.
Yeah, good point.
Because I'm okay with the comment being in there. It doesn't change my mind on compliance, but I'm okay with the comment.
Yeah, the comment actually could have been made, would have been a comment could have been made with someone who found in compliance as well. So the comment, I can see you are working toward achieving this, but still have some gaps and working on training staff. Does the board want to keep that comment? We have 1, said yes, I'm assuming too.
I'm okay.
Yeah.
All right, consensus to keep the comment, all right. Thank you, Director Ashton, for not letting me move on without that. Question 2, ensure that continuity of leadership exists at each level of the district's management. In compliance on that, same comment as above, I'm sure that was Tony, okay.
I think that we could remove that comment.
Yep,
Do we need
it's
to
fine.
specifically say that?
Nope.
Okay.
Ensure that district plans include a projection of foreseeable disasters or emergency situations. That was found to be in compliance. And then the question 4, ensure that the district test disaster emergency preparedness plans for their ability to assure organizational continuity. And there were 4 in compliance, 1 out of compliance or not in compliance, and the comment is, it is good to see that rapid responder is being used again and updates to plans. I'm sorry, that's not reading right to me, but the coordinated councils is another step being worked on, but still not fully compliant. All right, so someone want to clarify that comment? Is that
That was mine again. So, I mean, it was obvious that in the report that it showed that rapid responder hadn't been used since 2014, and a concern, since especially that's a state law, is what the report had said. But that also coordinated councils, meeting with police, the sheriff, the fire, I think that's all, and the school district, possibly each individual school, is not making the organizational continuity was the very key thing, is what coordinated council purpose is, so that everybody had the plans together for each of the different situations.
Good.
That as a whole, we're not on the same page there for this specific question.
and what does the rest of the board feel about that, Tony?
Again, I would just read the top statement itself, the policy itself, and always refer to it first. Because, again, from my view as a board member, we're not judging compliance on the means, on what the superintendent plans to use to become compliant, and whether we like it or not, or think they've done enough use. Really, the purpose of this policy is to make sure that there is a emergency preparedness class plan, and that it can ensure an organizational continued continuity. So I look at it and it says have they tested the plan? Do they have a plan? And does it have organizational continuity? I'm less concerned about what the plan is, and I'm more concerned that it's following policy and there's a plan in place and it's been tested, because that's what the policy says.
And that's how I looked at it too. I know I did state in there that it's been a while that all the organizations have got together, but it's because of the changing of the superintendent and everything else. But they're working on getting that back together again to meet those goals.
Okay, and what do you think, Mike?
The plan's in place, and it's being updated. That's why I think it should be in compliant. Like Tony says, it gets tricky. It gets tricky if you verbatim every single word. I mean, all the question is asking is that we ensure that the district tests this preparedness plan, and they are. So.
Okay. So it sounds like there's still a consensus of compliance in question 4 or section 4. Is there a feeling that we should keep the comment or not on this?
Personally, I feel like that comment really is more under EL2, where it talks about the superintendent will obey the law, and because the specific comment is that we weren't following the law, and my antenna goes up into that's a different policy. What you're saying could be correct, but we have a policy that says the superintendent will follow the law.
So I agree with that part of it, but I would also remind the board that we don't evaluate on past performance. if a superintendent admits we were out of compliance at this point, but we have corrected that, then I don't think it would be right for us as a board to hold them accountable for that. And so the comment that it's good to see we're using it, I'm fine with that, but even then, I don't think the ELT would have been appropriate to put that if the issue has been resolved. Because otherwise, we're evaluating past performance.
It does say the superintendent shall not cause or allow unsafe or unlawful behavior. So,
But we don't evaluate past performance.
so when do you evaluate it if something unlawful or unsafe happened?
If you find out something unlawful or unsafe is happening through a direct inspection, you would bring it up then. If in the report, they say, yes, we're not using rapid responder, then that's unlawful.
So in the report, it actually, this was the transition in several administration roles required other priorities to be addressed first. That's why coordinated councils was not being used. That was another one of the red flags of, that's part of the plan. So,
Are we talking about
I don't know if that would
the
be.
legal issue of rapid responder, or?
No, that was the coordinated councils. That was the specific quote for coordinated councils, not for the rapid responder. And I don't know if coordinated councils, I don't remember in the report if it responded, if coordinated councils is also a law, or if just using rapid responder was the law.
Okay.
I'm not sure on that specific.
The comment I was making specifically was about if there was something that was not being followed, that the law said you have to use this system, that if it had been corrected, then I don't think we evaluate on past performance.
Where is that in policy?
It can be that we evaluate on, we don't evaluate on past performance.
Because monitoring reports are always past performance.
Monitoring reports should maybe speak to past performance, but talk about current reality. It's okay to put a comment, I think, but it can't be, but to say you're out of compliance because of something that happened in the past, I think our policies specifically state that that's not how we operate. And I can't think of the policy off the top of my head, but I'll find it.
Find it for me.
Okay.
Because I think the actual wording of the policy is more in the lines of that we'll try to monitor the future more than the past, but I don't believe it says we won't monitor the past at all.
Okay.
So if you can
Should we
find
try
it-
not in this instance then?
Because if it's an issue that hasn't been resolved, you're still monitoring the past. And even if and we're monitoring a time period, the time period from when he gives us a report. Because
Well, we said
otherwise,
it has been resolved though, right?
otherwise the superintendent could always give you a report that says, here's all the things that were wrong, but I fixed them all overnight, and so I'm still in compliance. Because I intend to fix them, I'm gonna fix them, things are gonna get better.
I would not say we should ignore something based on intent to fix. Okay, so
And again, going back to, we're kind of splitting hairs in some way, but the second that was found, that was not happening, that the board should have been informed then as well, too, according to policy. Not that we found it 3 months ago and we've already corrected it, and here's the report 3 months later. It is an obligation for the superintendent to provide us any incompliance of any policy at the time he finds it's not compliant.
what I want to be careful doing is not putting the superintendent in a position that they'll leave things out of reports because they're afraid that something that they're admitting, hey, we weren't doing this right, and it's been corrected, that they're going to be found out of compliance every time they do that. So I wouldn't want us to put them in that position.
I hear you, but I also want to follow the board's policy that says the superintendent, the minute he knows something's not in compliance, should be informing the board.
I agree. We don't know that's the case here, though.
Except for it says that it was found some time back to be out of compliance, and they made steps to fix it at that point.
Do you think he was made aware of it, or maybe just the people who are in charge
His
of safety?
report doesn't say, but they should have been accountable to him as well then. We only judge accountability to the superintendent, not to his staff.
Right. But we're making some assumptions that he knew before, that he compiled the report.
Yeah, so his report, should clarify that, whether
Okay.
he knew or not.
All right. I'm going to try to summarize this. So I believe that there is compliance for EL3. There are no exceptions, but there is a comment from question 1 that we want to keep that says, I can see you are working toward achieving this, but still have some gaps and working on training staff. Am I correct?
So are you not wanting to put the comment in question 4?
I don't have a opinion about that one way or the other, but I asked the board and I thought they said no comment on that one. Was I incorrect?
Give
Or did
me
I
just
stop
a second.
too
I
soon?
wanna,
I don't,
I wanna recommend a comment, but I need to find the, correct EL to assess it to. Maybe somebody can help me. Which EL is it, this, where the superintendent is supposed to notify the board when he's not in compliance immediately? Does any board members know off the top of your head where that's at? I can find it.
Was that
EL12.
EL2?
I don't think it's EL2. I think it may be an EL12.
So did you get my email? I'm trying to send these to you as I do the documents.
Number 9 on EL12, Tony, a failure to report before the next regularly scheduled board
Yeah.
meeting any actual or anticipated non-compliance with any board ends or executive limitations policy.
12, section 9. So I would like to propose we add a comment to this policy that says, as per EL12, policy EL12, section 9, the board expects to be notified of any incompliance issues with any policy at the time that, hopefully you guys are writing this down. At the time the out of compliance issue is found. It seems that there may have been a time during the year that you knew there was a provision of this policy that was not in compliance and the board was not notified at that time.
One more time, Tony.
Should have wrote it down.
should have recorded that. Can we
And-
play that
and
back
we'll
on
need-
Facebook?
We'll need board consensus on this as well. But as per policy EL12, section 9, the superintendent is required to provide the board with notice any time a policy falls out of compliance. It appears from your report that
Wait.
sections of this, are you caught up?
No.
It appears from your report,
No.
are you there? Tell me when you're ready.
It appears from your report.
Is it section 4 of this policy? Does the section qualify with question number 4?
Yes, I think so.
Regarding
Yes.
section 4.
Right.
Bullet, is it a bullet item?
It just says item 4, so EL3 section 4. Was discovered as out of compliance during this past year and the board was not informed.
How does the rest of the board feel about that
You
comment?
might want to reread it.
I'll reread it after the rest of the board tells me that they want it.
I agree. I mean, that's an emergency preparedness plan, and that is important for the safety.
It doesn't change my opinion on compliance. I just think that the minute it was out of compliance,
So
you
there's
should
two
have let
board
us know.
members who want that item included to comment. Ken, what do you
No,
think?
I agree. It's not changing that it was still in compliance, but it just making the board more aware of when something will be out, or when it is out of compliance on this issue.
Okay. Mike, you want to comment?
No.
Okay. So here's what I have. Overall comment. As per policy EL 12, Section 9, the superintendent is required to notify the board anytime a policy is out of compliance. It appears from your report regarding item 4 that there was a part regarding rapid responder that was discovered to be out of compliance earlier this year, but the board was not informed.
I
Is
agree
that
with that.
what you're...
And the superintendent, of course, has a opportunity to respond to that if he was not aware or whatever he wants to. He always has an opportunity to respond to that once he gets the report.
Okay. Trying to do these as we do it, and then I gave Talia access, and she was like modifying the font while in the middle of it. Was freaking me out. I saw her name next to it. I was like, oh. Okay. So that was the two items under item D2, EL survey monkey results. Now we'll move on to item D3, board superintendent relations survey monkey results. Now these, for our new members, a little different because we don't get reports on these from the superintendent. This is where we evaluate ourselves and our compliance.
Rob, I have a question.
Yeah.
We were waiting to, at the time, when we made the decision to not do the official approval of the compliance monitoring report documents, it was because we couldn't see it, because it had to be typed later. Where it sounds like you're doing this in real time, I'm not sure why we can't just have an approval of it now and not have to go to the.
It's in our policy that we'll approve it on the next meeting, so we have to change
It's
policy.
not in our policy.
I read it the other day, but
Find it. It's not.
I will,
there.
but I'm not going to find it today.
If it is, then it's changed, because that's not what it.
Okay. For right now, because we're way behind, I'm going to follow our normal procedure, and then we can bring this up next board
I
meeting.
think when you reread the policy, it'll say we accept the monitoring report one meeting, and we do the monitoring response the next meeting, is what the policy actually says. But you can go back and reread it, and we'll discuss
Okay.
it next meeting.
I will. Thank you. So we're moving on to...
And apologize when you stand corrected, please.
What's that? I will. It's really not about... Right now, I'm just trying to get moving, Tony, because I'm already 20 minutes, half an hour behind. And this is a lunch meeting. All right.
It will reflect in my evaluation.
I'm sure it will. Item BSR 1. The board or individual members will never give instructions to persons who report directly or indirectly to the superintendent. Of 5 responses, all found that it was in compliance. And there's a comment, I believe we have made great strides in the area over the years. Does the board want to keep that comment?
It should say this area. Apologize.
I
board like
think the
to keep the comment?
comment's good.
Okay.
Whether it's changed to this or not, then.
The board will not formally evaluate any staff member other than the superintendent. And all found that to be, 4 found that to be in compliance. Looks like we just had 4 that answered that one. And no response. Question 3, the board will view successful superintendent performance as identical to organizational accomplishment of the board's end policies and compliance with the board's executive limitation policies. And there's 4, again, that answered that, all found in compliance. In question 4, members will refer to the superintendent regarding any compliments, complaints, or criticism about operational issues so that issues and trends can be addressed and tracked. All 4 found that to be in compliance. So am I hearing that overall in compliance with 1 comment? Okay. One of the things that we don't go over in these survey monkeys that's in our policy GP 4.1.1 is it says on item 2 In order to maintain its commitment to excellence and governance, to the provisions of this policy, and to improve its own performance, the board commits to the following actions. What does the board feel about whether or not we should fill that out every time?
I believe it should be a question on the Survey Monkey, and if there's responses to it, then we should discuss it in the future.
What's the feeling of the rest of the board?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, whenever we do GP policies or BSRs, we want to make sure we have now a new item that is verbatim to what item 2 says on that, on GP 4.1.1. So the board can discuss, and actually it'll be an opportunity for us to write in what we would like to do to commit to furthering, the word I'm trying to look at, furthering or improving our own performance in the future. That's whether we're in compliance or not. There's always ways we can improve. All right. Sorry, this is a little clunky with this. I'm afraid if I don't do it now and wait till later, I'll forget what everyone said. Okay, so we'll move on to the SurveyMonkey results for BSR 2. So the first item, decisions or instructions of individual board members, officers, or committees are not binding on the superintendent except in rare instances when the board has specifically delegated such exercise of authority. And that was found in compliance with no responses, in compliance by all. Individual members were not given instructions to or request work of the superintendent except in rare instances. Except in rare instances when the board has specifically delegated such exercise of authority. 4 found in compliance, 1 found in compliance with an exception. The comment is, for the most part, I believe the board is in compliance of this. However, I believe there have been situations in the past year where board members have given instructions to the superintendent individually. Do we want to have specific? It's a little bit of an awkward thing, but I guess this is us holding each other compliant. Should we, I think we need to have a specific example, maybe?
I'm trying to think, I wrote the comment, I'm trying to think of anything, a specific example. There's been times I can just hold myself compliant. There's been times when and maybe the intention was not to ask the superintendent to change anything, but I've expressed concerns to the superintendent and then changes happened without the board even being apprised of it. And it's mostly my fault as a board member because when I correspond with the superintendent, I need to make sure that I'm saying, this is my thought as an individual board member. Don't change anything, but this is just my feeling. You can do what you want, but if you want direction, you need to come to the full board. And I need to be holding myself accountable to that standard, that I make sure that the superintendent understands that I'm not asking him to change anything.
In those instances, did you give instruction or request work of the superintendent?
I could see in hindsight how the way I worded some things could have been perceived as me giving the superintendent instruction. So I'm holding myself, this is what my interpretation of this policy is holding ourselves accountable. So I'm holding myself accountable as one board member, that I know at times that I have not been clear enough with the superintendent with the comments that I've made.
I can understand you saying that. However, I don't think that necessarily you asking questions, I think that he knows that there is the boundary there. For changes being made just by you asking questions doesn't necessarily mean that you were requesting work or giving instruction. He might have just realized he has a valid point and made those changes without feeling that. I don't think it's bad for us to keep the comment.
This
Because
is,
it's-
this is holding ourselves accountable, though, not the superintendent.
Right. But, so,
Obviously, it was for in compliance, and we're holding ourselves in compliance. One board member feeling like, that, I feel like others on the board have done the same thing, but I can't think of specific examples, but I know of times when other board members have asked the superintendent to do something, or had a concern about something, and it immediately got changed without the rest of the board even discussing it. Some of it has to do with agenda changes. But again, it has nothing really to do with the superintendent, it has to do with the board itself, from my view.
so this portion doesn't really go anywhere, is what you're saying.
Sure it does.
Yeah, we hold ourselves accountable.
I mean, to
so-
us, but it's not like, and to the public, but,
It's,
Having heard Tony's explanation, I'm okay with the comment being left there.
would you say that then that Tony's explanation and admittance put us right into compliance with exception?
Well, that's what he marked.
Yeah, but that's one of 5.
You know, overall, it's in, question 2 is in compliance, but my comment was to the comment remaining there.
so you're saying you still think that we're in compliance, that not necessarily you or others have done this. You still think it should stay in compliance, but keep the comment.
Well, Tony says it's in compliance, but he wants it in compliance with the exception. Unless 2 other people agree with Tony, it will be in compliance, but I'm saying that the comment should stay there, and having heard the reason for his comment, I don't have a problem with the comment being there. It'll be a reminder to myself to, if I'm found in the same situation, or now that he says that, I can maybe recall an instance of something like that happening, so.
I'm going to read the question again with the item. Individual members will not give instructions to, or request work of the superintendent, except in rare instances. When the board has specifically delegated such exercise of authority. So we have a member who just admitted to giving instruction to or requesting work of the superintendent. And I don't believe that was when that authority was delegated to you. Is that
Correct.
correct, Tony?
The only one that I'm aware of that the board has delegated authority to is to the president, the acting president at the time.
So if a board member just admitted this, then how are we in compliance?
But hold on, you did say sometimes it had to do with agenda, and you were vice president and sometimes dealing with the agenda. Maybe the term giving instruction to the superintendent individually in your comment.
I feel like we have a board member trying to wants us to hold them accountable, and we're not doing it.
Yeah, but I also heard from you too that it may have been just your wording.
It wasn't
and how the
intentional.
Right.
how the superintendent
Right. No.
took it that way.
I don't think there's
So,
going to be any punishment for this.
Yeah, I don't see any
Wet noodles?
emission of wrongdoing
I could
really
pay a
there.
fine.
It just,
Right.
it's how the wording was taken by the second party.
Yes.
I don't think we're infallible as a board, and I'm not infallible as a board member. And I can readily admit when there's things that I think I can improve on. And I personally think I can improve in this area. So for me, it's in compliance with an exception. If the rest of the board feels like they're in compliance in that area, that this just, the comment really is just my comment. I don't know how else to state it.
It doesn't say you as a member. It says individual members will not.
I still think keep as is with the compliance vote and the comment.
So in compliance with the comment. Correct? Okay. Question 3. Board members should refer parents, employees, and others with complaints directly to the responsible individual closest to the situation, classroom teacher, school principal, central office staff, or the superintendent's office. And if needed, will report such should be contacts to the superintendent for follow-up. CGP 14, process for dealing with a request or complaint. All of us found in compliance with that with no comments. So it sounds like the feedback I got was in compliance. There's a statement that we want to make.
Could I request that you, when you rewrite that statement, that you reference the section of the policy we're referring to? Because otherwise it won't be in the monitoring.
Yeah, I've been doing
response
that.
document.
Yep.
Also, could I note that that misspelling is not a misspelling from SurveyMonkey, it's a misspelling from the policy, so I would suggest that that gets corrected.
Let's add that, well, that policy will be in policy review next time,
Yeah.
right? So that's, hopefully we don't miss it again.
Just a reminder, in case I forget.
Talia, could you, when you put that in, could you do a side-by-side with that revision, actually, so that we don't have to worry about forgetting? Thank you. Right. Based on that, do we want to make a comment in order to maintain its commitment to excellence in governance? The board commits to the following actions.
Yeah, I would suggest that we restate the comment down below in a way that says this, that board members will assure that any comments they make to the superintendent are not construed as direction. If the rest of the board is willing to commit to that.
Okay, so does the board agree with this statement? Going forward, each board member commits to not giving instruction to or asking work of the superintendent unless that authority is specifically delegated to them. Does that sound agreeable to all board members? Okay. All right, so we'll move on to BSR 4.
Did we skip 3?
Did we?
Sorry,
Yes.
We
we're
did,
on
but
3.
it's-
We need
it's
to go to
totally-
3.
It's good with you.
3 is all 4 of them are all
Come
in
on.
compliance.
All right, well,
Can we,
no comments and all in
no
compliance?
comments.
That's too easy.
Great, okay.
So they want to change their mind? Or we get on that?
Good.
All right. So I have a request of the board. We make sure we get our Survey Monkeys in advance, so when I'm putting in my timing expectations, that's part of what I look at, is whether or not or we get them all in time. Part of what I look at is if there are no out of compliances or very many comments. I know that's going to be more discussions. So just asking that we always have those in advance so that I can have a decent estimation of how long the meeting's going to be.
President Simmons, it may be something that we'll discuss at a later date, but our board calendar actually says that the Survey Monkeys are due the Monday before the meeting. And right now, they're going out the Monday before the meeting.
Okay.
And we're being told to put them in by Friday. Could be, but that's what the board calendar says.
Okay.
May help you some.
Thank you, yeah. All right. BSR 4. I'm going to skip to the one that was not fully in compliance.
There is a comment on 2.
Oh, I'm going to go to question 2 where there's a comment. Thank you. I missed that. The item is the board will acquire monitoring data on ends and executive limitations policies by one or more of 3 methods. By internal report, in which a superintendent discloses and certifies compliance information to the board, by external report in which an external disinterested third party selected by the board assesses compliance with board policies, by direct board inspection in which the board assesses compliance with the appropriate policy criteria. And there's found to be all in compliance, but there is a comment. We should consider indicating in our monitoring reports which combination of methods we use to determine compliance.
That's not my comment, but I think that's totally
That's
valid.
my comment.
So
That's a
is this
great
the
comment.
superintendent should consider in their monitoring report, which
No.
combination?
No, I think the board should consider in our monitoring reports to the superintendent what methods.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I probably
monitoring
wrote the
reports from
wrong thing.
superintendent.
Compliance, the one that where we do compliance, I think that it would be, according to this this section, it would be good for the board to state how we found compliance, whether it was a combination of the three, or if we just used one of the items. Do you follow what I'm saying?
You're saying that you would suggest in our monitoring document.
Our monitoring response document is the one I
Okay.
meant.
Gotcha. And that would be the comment I was going to make about these, I'll make now. We have typically only brought the main policy when we do policy review, but I would suggest that we have the policy plus all sub-policies, like BSR 4 has BSR 4.1.1, 4.1.2, which are our monitoring response documents. And that's where we'd want to make the policy change, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So Talia,
And-
on that would just be a little different practice than we've had, but it's in a few instances.
And
GPA.
as I thought about it since then, we actually have, the board probably should go and review, let me look at the policy real quick. Because since I wrote that comment, I did some additional research. And at the bottom of BSR 4, it actually shows the method, which I knew it was in there, but I forgot after I made that comment. So if you look at BSR 4 and you scroll down below number 4, we list all the policies. The dates are incorrect, by the way, on some of them, and as to when we monitor it, but it shows the method on there, and I failed to notice that when I was doing the Survey Monkey. It still wouldn't hurt to put it in the monitoring response document, but we've agreed in BSR 4 how we're monitoring each policy. See where I'm talking about? Policy BSR 4, and then it lists all the policies, when we monitor them, and the method.
I thought you were saying you wanted it in the monitoring response document.
I did, but that was before I realized that it's actually in the policy what method that we're using.
Oh, gotcha. I knew they were there. I thought you were wanting us to actually state it again.
It wouldn't hurt to state it again, still, from my view.
All right, well, you'll have that opportunity then, next board meeting, to put in policy review. So, GP4, GP8, BSR 4 are three off the top of my head that have sub-policies. So when we evaluate the main policy, we'll evaluate the policies underneath them too. GP6 as well, but 6.1 is no longer a committee, so really should be removed now because it ended. Okay. So, based on this new information, do we want that suggestion still there?
I
For the
still would
comment?
like to see it restated in the monitoring response document. I would like the statement to be corrected to reference the right document, though.
I think it can't hurt for us to keep it in there for ourselves. I mean, because that's what the purpose of this is for ourselves. It
This
can't
would-
hurt for us to
This would cause us to change practice, though.
Oh.
Currently, we don't say in the monitoring response document, this was monitored by internal report and direct inspection, for instance. We don't say that. It would mean that that's stated in the monitoring response document. So it is just a suggestion, but really the suggestion is going to come up next meeting in policy review, and then the board will have an opportunity to say yes or no.
To make a change to BSR 4.
So right now, we're just discussing, are we keeping the comment or not, right?
In the comment would be in the monitoring response document to include that in the monitoring response document in the future. I think that's what I'm understanding.
Consider it. The comment doesn't necessarily need to be there, because I'm gonna put it in policy review anyway, but it's up to the board.
What do you think, Ken? Comment or no comment?
No comment.
Jen?
I'm still a keep it, so
I'm a
I
no
guess
comment.
you're okay.
It'll be there next week, or next board meeting, I'm sure of it. In every case, the standard for compliance shall be whether the superintendent has reasonably interpreted the board policy being monitored. The board will make the final decision as to whether a superintendent interpretation is reasonable and will provide to the superintendent by the next meeting a monitoring response document. The president will gather individual board member input and will draft a board response document for consideration at the next meeting. Tony, just wanted to let you know that that's the policy I was talking about.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was saying that it said.
Didn't you say we should approve it right now?
By the next meeting, the meeting after he gave us the,
I'm gathering board input right now. Correct? And drafting a response document for consideration at the next meeting.
yeah, I guess the way I read it is different than the way you read it, obviously.
Okay.
So, since I like to rewrite policies, I may be rewriting it to make it more clear.
Okay.
Because it says the next meeting, and then it says the next meeting. It doesn't say the next meeting after that. The way you're reading it is as 3 different meetings, and that's not how I read it. But
So there was,
in the interest of time, I'm trying to help you out.
you're so helpful today. I appreciate it. So 4, found in compliance. 1, in compliance with the following exception. In the past, the board has accepted the superintendent's interpretation as reasonable, regardless of whether the board agreed with it. This policy seems to me to indicate the board can find superintendent's interpretation out of compliance. I would like to see further discussion about board consensus of what this policy means.
Interested to know the board's thoughts. I wrote that. You can tell by the time once you kind of get the gist.
I do agree that next meeting doesn't, that we need to change, that it can be interpreted 2 different ways. Whatever. That we need to make it more clear, the wording of the policy now. So we're discussing this at the next meeting, the policy. It sounds like there's going to be a change.
This comment really, it doesn't have anything to do with that, though. This comment is really more in reference to the board's past practice has been that when the superintendent gives us a report and he says, here's the statement, here's my interpretation of what this statement means, and then here's where I'm in compliance. In the past, the board as a whole has taken the stance that if that's how the superintendent interpreted it, that we have to agree with that interpretation because that's how he interpreted it. I'm just saying the way I read this policy, that's not correct by policy. And you guys weren't on the board at times when I'm specifically, but the other board members here should know exactly what I'm talking about, I think. You look blank, but you know what I'm talking about, Mike and
I thought we got his interpretations and we mulled those over as we were going over each one of these. And I thought at that time the consensus was established as to the response he gave us. That's my recollection anyway.
So, to state specific examples, there was a lot of discussion when we reapproved salaries. And the general consensus of the board and public was if that's how Dr. Hurst interprets our policy, then we have to abide by his interpretation. And so we approved them. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But the way I read this, the board could have come back and said, no, we don't agree with that interpretation. We don't think that's a reasonable interpretation. and not approved at the time, for that specific incidents. There's
I
been
can only
others,
say
but-
for myself that I always felt that board had the ability to do that.
Yeah.
Whether or not the
If you go
board did
back
in
to
the end, I've always felt we had the ability to say, no, that's not
Yeah,
the
but
right
if you
interpretation.
go back and listen to those actual meetings, that's not what was stated in the meeting, and the board all shook their heads in agreement in the meeting when we reviewed those things. But, so maybe you did, but apparently the majority of the board didn't at that time, because I went back and looked at it. But I just found it just a reminder really to the board that, because this is again holding ourselves accountable, that if we feel like the superintendent has not interpreted, had a reasonable interpretation of a policy, then we need to be discussing it as a board, not accepting it as well, that's how the superintendent interpreted it, so we need to rewrite the policy. Does that make sense? Again, these policies are the board holding itself accountable. It's not, has nothing to do with the superintendent.
So, does the board want to keep that comment?
I think yes, whether it, for references in the past and even into the future, I think that we need to evaluate also his interpretation of the policy and then the report as well, because if his interpretation is not what the intent of the policy was, then not only does the policy need to change, but the report isn't correct.
And going back to that, you have to guise it on we're not discussing whether the policy met the board's intent. We're discussing whether a reasonable person would have interpreted that policy that way. That's where the board would disagree and say, I don't believe a reasonable person would have interpreted the policy statement the way you did. That's my interpretation of what that means. If the policy itself if a reasonable person could take what the policy says and make the same statement the superintendent made, then he has reasonably interpreted the policy, even though it wasn't your intent as a board to make it that way. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
But the board comes to the conclusion whether that, as a whole, whether a reasonable person would have interpreted the policy that way. It's like the master's class in policy governance, but.
What do you think, Ken?
A little confused on this one.
I think the whole statement could be rewritten when it's revised to make it a lot more clear,
Yeah,
by the way.
I
But-
agree to that. I agree. It could probably be rewritten.
There'll be further discussion.
What do you think, Mike?
It's in compliance, and let's keep the comment there.
Okay. Sounds like that was a consensus. Then question 4 was in compliance with no questions. Or no comments, I mean. Okay, well, we are an hour and 10 minutes late going into policy review, which we have none, and then executive session. So we're going to take not even a 5-minute recess. We're going to take a 2-minute recess just to make sure the room's cleared for our executive session. And then we will go into executive session for 15 minutes for the purpose of discussing personnel or staff evaluation.